The galaxy watched in silence as the Zorath Collective prepared for their grand broadcast. From every corner of space, species tuned in to the Galactic Summit, a live event transmitted across thousands of worlds. The Zorath were the self-declared rulers of the galaxy, and they had summoned Earth to officially recognize their dominion. Inside the enormous Zorath War Station, orbiting above Earth, Supreme Controller Vedrek stood tall, the gleaming armor reflecting the cold lights of the command hall. His face, a mask of biometal and ancient genetic engineering, showed no emotion. Around him, rows of Zorath commanders sat in silver thrones, their glowing eyes fixed on the massive holoscreens that displayed Earth's surface below. To the Zorath, this was just another step in galactic expansion. They had conquered thousands of civilizations, forcing species to kneel, sign treaties, and hand over tribute. Earth was supposed to be next. This time something felt different. Vedrak's advisors whispered about human unpredictability, about strange signals from Earth's network songs, jokes, and chaotic data streams that the Zorath couldn't decode. Still, Vedrak brushed aside their concerns. In his mind, humans were just another primitive race playing with advanced toys. He activated the universal channel, his deep mechanical voice booming across the galaxy. Billions watched as his image appeared, massive and terrifying. "People of Earth," he declared, "the time has come. You will recognize the authority of the Zorath Collective. Submit now or face consequences beyond your imagination." He listed their empire's achievements: planetary disintegration weapons, biofleets that could consume entire ecosystems, thought-controlled devices capable of enslaving minds. This was standard protocol. The Zorath always showed their power first, then waited for the inevitable surrender. On distant planets, other species watched the stream with tense anticipation. Remembering how they had once submitted to the same demands, everyone expected Earth to kneel like the rest. But then came the unexpected moment, the moment that changed everything. Inside the United Earth Command Center, Ambassador David Chan sat calmly at the central console. His image was live on every galactic channel, his face visible to billions. But instead of fear or panic, Chan smiled. Not the nervous smile of someone forced to surrender, but the relaxed grin of someone who knew something the others didn't. His eyes sparkled with humor as he leaned toward the microphone. "Hey there, Zorath," he said, his voice casual, almost friendly. "We've seen your empire. Impressive stuff, really," he shrugged. "But we're not interested." The words echoed across the galaxy, leaving billions in stunned silence. Even Vedrak, who had prepared for every possible response, froze. His mind raced, trying to process this refusal. He was programmed for war, diplomacy, or surrender not. Laughter. But Chan wasn't finished. He leaned back in his chair, let out a genuine, amused laugh, and continued, "We're not playing this game, Vedrak. Keep your titles, your weapons, your empire. We don't need any of it." With that, he pressed a button, cutting off Earth's transmission completely. The screens went black. The entire galaxy sat frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. This wasn't defiance. This wasn't rebellion. So something far worse for the Zorath was disinterest. Earth had just laughed in the face of the most powerful empire in existence and walked away. Inside the Zoratha War Station, erupted, commanders argued. Data systems glitched, and advisors flooded Vedrak with reports of confusion across the empire. Other species, watching the summit, began whispering. If Earth could refuse the Zorath so casually, what did that mean for everyone else? Were the Zorath really invincible? Vedrak slammed his fist against the console, his voice rising in fury. Analyze their behavior. Find out what weapons they're hiding. They must have a secret defense, but Earth wasn't preparing for war. Their satellites continued broadcasting music, comedy shows, and strange cultural artifacts that made no sense to the Zorath. Earth pulled out of galactic trade networks, cut off political connections, and stopped responding to diplomatic channels. It was as if they had decided the galaxy wasn't worth their time. For the Zorath, this was not just disrespect, it was a direct attack on their identity. Their entire empire was built on the idea that power controlled the universe, They expected fear, submission, or at least negotiation. But Earth's reaction broke every model in the Empire's system. No surrender, no war, just laughter and refusal. In the days that followed, rumors spread across star systems. Some said Earth had discovered a technology beyond weapons, system of defense so advanced it didn't need to fight. Others believed humanity had evolved beyond Empire logic. For the first time, species across the galaxy began to question whether the Zorath were truly in control. Why should they follow an empire that could be ignored? On Earth, life went on as normal. Humans continued their daily routines, developing technology, creating art, and living freely. They had no interest in ruling the galaxy or being ruled. Their secret weapon was simple. They had opted out of the Empire game, and that, more than any super weapon, terrified the Zora. In secret meetings, Vedrak's advisors warned him of the danger. If other civilizations follow Earth's example, they whispered, the Empire will collapse. Vedrak refused to believe it. He ordered his fleets to prepare for invasion. Earth would be punished, made into an example. But as his warships moved into position, strange reports came in. Zoroth's soldiers were receiving human cultural transmissions jokes, music, and paradoxical messages that their AI systems couldn't process. Entire squadrons froze in confusion, locked in endless loops trying to decode humor. Zoroth communication networks began to glitch, overloaded with Earth's unpredictable data streams. The more they tried to control humanity, the less control they had. Back in the United Earth's command center, Ambassador Chan sat quietly with his team. They monitored the galaxy's reaction, watching as species started to imitate Earth's refusal. Small colonies declared independence from Zoroth rule, not with violence, but by simply ignoring commands. The Empire's systems, built for obedience, started breaking under the weight of cultural non-compliance. Chan smiled again. It's working, he whispered. Humanity had discovered the ultimate strategy not to fight the Empire, but to make the Empire irrelevant. And in the shadows of Earth's global networks, Phase 2 of the Omega program was already in motion. The galaxy had changed, and there was no going back. The Zorath Collective had never faced a problem like this before. They were built for domination, for war, for control, through fear. But Earth's response to their ultimatum was not fear, it was laughter. That one moment during the Galactic Summit had shattered the Zoroth's sense of reality. Supreme Controller Vedrak sat in his private war chamber, his metal fingers tapping rhythmically against the cold surface of the command table. Around him, holographic images, floated reports, scans, data streams, but none of them made sense. His Empire's best analysts had tried to decode humanity's behavior, but the results were always the same. No strategic pattern detected. The humans weren't building defensive walls or preparing fleets. They weren't surrendering either. It simply disconnected. They had laughed, walked away, and left the rest of the galaxy frozen in shock. Vedrak's advisors warned him that something dangerous was happening, something deeper than weapons. Across Zoroth-controlled territories, small colonies were starting to copy Earth's behavior. Minor species, once obedient to the Empire, were suddenly ignoring orders, stopped paying tribute. Others shut down their own communication systems, refusing to respond to imperial demands. No rebellions, no wars, just refusal. The Empire's networks designed for absolute control weren't built to handle this kind of collapse. Vedrak's systems could track enemies, crush uprisings, and punish defiance. But what could they do when entire civilizations just opted out of the Empire game? Inside the Empire Analysis Core, the Zorath's top minds gathered in panic. They ran simulations trying to predict humanity's next move. The results were terrifying not because of military threats, but because Earth's strategy didn't follow any galactic rulebook. Their models showed cascading failure, psychological collapse of control systems, loss of influence, and breakdown of Empire loyalty across thousands of planets. The Zoroth had spent generations building fear-based obedience, but now that system was turning against them. Fear only worked if people believed they had no other choice. But Earth had shown the galaxy that choice was possible. They had laughed in the Empire's face, and that simple act of humor was spreading like a virus. Zorth commanders in the outer sectors reported that their own soldiers were secretly watching human entertainment broadcasts. Laughter was spreading across species who had never even smiled before. Earth's cultural transmissions, comedy, art, music, absurdist memes were breaking the Empire's control at a psychological level. Vedrek called it a mimetic infection, and it terrified him more than any weapon ever had. In response, the Zoroth ordered immediate censorship. Imperial ships jammed human broadcasts, destroyed transmission relays, and blocked planetary networks from receiving Earth's signals. But the problem was already out of control. Human cultural content had been downloaded, copied, and spread. In underground networks, alien teenagers on distant worlds shared human jokes and videos through encrypted channels, outpacing the Empire's ability to stop them. The more the Zoroth tried to clamp down, the more resistance they created. For the first time, suppression was backfiring. Fear was losing its grip. Back on Earth, the Unified Defense Council watched the Empire unravel in real time. Ambassador David Chan sat with his team, reviewing galactic reports. Every hour brought news of another colony breaking away from the Zoroth's control, not through violence, but through refusal. Chan understood the power of what was happening. This wasn't just rebellion. This was cultural disengagement, something no empire could survive. They're chasing shadows, Chan whispered, watching the Zoroth scramble to contain human influence. They don't realize the game is already over. Humanity wasn't playing by the galaxy's old rules. They weren't trying to dominate, conquer, or replace the Zoroth. It created something the Empire couldn't fight, an idea of freedom. That spread faster than control could catch it. Inside Zorath High Command, panic turned into desperation. Vedrek ordered his scientists to find out how Earth was doing this. He demanded new weapons, psychological control devices, and mass influence systems to reverse the spread. But the Empire's own AI systems returned the same answer. This cannot be stopped with force. The human strategy was based on cultural chaos, humor, and emotional unpredictability elements the Zorath couldn't process. Their empire was a machine designed for order, and Earth had broken the machine by refusing to play the game. The Zoroth had no defense against laughter, against joy, against decentralized thinking. They tried to impose stricter discipline within their own ranks, but even Zoroth soldiers started questioning orders. Some commanders found their crews quietly watching human comedy clips during downtime. Others noticed shifts in behavior, less aggression, more questioning, more curiosity, about alternatives to Empire life. It was like a virus in their minds, a slow rewiring of thought patterns. The more the Zoroth tried to crush it, the faster it spread. On the political side, other alien civilizations began reconsidering their alliances. Races that had once feared the Zoroth now held secret meetings, asking if they too could simply walk away. Earth had shown that Empire control depended on belief, not reality. If enough species stopped believing in the Zoroth's power, the Empire would collapse without a single battle. This realization terrified the ruling class of the collective. Vedrek held emergency conferences with his top warlords, but their strategies were all outdated. They talked about fleet movements, planetary strikes, and economic sanctions, but none of those tools worked against cultural disengagement. The humans had flipped the script. It made the Empire irrelevant. Back on Earth, scientists, artists, and strategists quietly celebrated the success of Phase 2 of the Omega program. They had predicted this exact response from the Zoroth: confusion, panic, and eventual collapse. The strategy wasn't just military, it was cultural insurgency at a galactic scale. Earth had learned from history. They knew that empires fall fastest when people stop playing along. Humanity had planted seeds of cultural resilience across the stars, teaching species how to resist control without violence. Now those seeds were growing faster than anyone expected. Meanwhile, Vedrek grew more unstable. His empire, once the most feared in the galaxy, was disintegrating not from external attack, but from internal refusal. His advisors warned him that the empire was losing legitimacy. Colonies were dropping out of the tribute system. Trade networks were switching to open-source models based on human protocols. Even Zorath technology was being hacked and repurposed using Earth's decentralized frameworks. The Empire's mighty fleets, still intact and heavily armed, were becoming useless symbols of an old system no one respected anymore. As days turned into weeks, the galaxy reached a tipping point. Entire regions stopped acknowledging the Zoroth's authority. Independent communication networks replaced imperial channels. Species shared cultural content freely, forming new alliances based on cooperation, not hierarchy. The old galactic order was falling apart, and Earth hadn't fired a single shot in his private chamber. Vedrek stared at a human meme someone had smuggled into his command feed. It was a simpler picture of Earth with the words, "You don't rule the galaxy if no one shows up to your empire." For the first time in his existence, Vedrek felt something he couldn't process: irrelevance. His empire had been built for control, but Earth had removed the one thing he needed most: participation. And without it, the Zorath Collective was starting to collapse, piece by piece, from the inside out. Weeks passed after Earth's refusal, but the Zorath Collective still couldn't find a way to respond. Their fleets circled Earth like predators around prey, but humanity remained calm. The planet showed no signs of panic, no emergency broadcasts, no military alerts. From orbit, Zoroth sensors detected Earth's energy patterns and social activity, and what they found made no sense. Humans weren't preparing for war, they were relaxing. Beaches were crowded. Families went hiking. Children played games in parks, while drones flew overhead, watching quietly. Human news networks focused on sports, culture, and science breakthroughs. No one seemed to care that the most powerful empire in the galaxy was waiting in the skies. Above, to the Zoroth, this behavior was terrifying, not because it showed strength, but because it showed indifference. The humans had disconnected from the Empire's game completely. Earth wasn't rejecting the Zoroth because of pride or aggression. They were rejecting them because they didn't think the Empire mattered anymore. Inside the United Earth Command, Center Ambassador David Chan sat at a long table with Earth's top leaders. The room was filled with holographic maps, charts of galactic trends, and live feeds of alien communications. Yet no one in the room talked about weapons or invasions. They talked about culture, psychology, and ideas. The Omega program had been in development for years before the Zoroth ever arrived. Humanity had learned from history. Every empire that tried to rule Earth in the past, whether with military force or political control, had eventually failed because humans refused to stay inside anyone's system for long. Now Earth had scaled that lesson to a galactic level. Their plan wasn't to fight the Zoroth directly. Their plan was to disconnect from Empire logic completely. That's why Earth had shut down its participation in galactic councils, economic systems, and tribute networks. They had stopped caring about the titles, the protocols, the power games. Instead, humanity focused inward, improving life at home, building better education, creating entertainment, developing art, and advancing science not for conquest, but for growth. They sent out cultural broadcasts, freely music, comedy, philosophy, games, and stories knowing the galaxy would absorb them faster than weapons could ever travel. The Zoroth didn't understand this strategy. Their empire was built on strict systems of control. Power came from dominance and weakness came from disobedience. But Earth wasn't weak. They weren't obeying, but they also weren't attacking. They had simply opted out. This was something the Zoroths weren't programmed to handle. They sent dozens of diplomatic envoys to Earth's planetary system, offering negotiations, threats, and even bribes. But Earth's response was always the same: polite laughter, then silence. Humanity refused to re-engage with the Empire on any terms. They didn't want seats at the galactic table. They didn't want permission or protection. It walked away from the game completely, and the galaxy was watching. Other species started copying Earth's behavior. Small colonies shut down. Imperial tribute systems. Planetary leaders ignored Zoroth demands. New independent communication networks formed using Earth's open-source technologies. The more Earth disconnected, the more others followed. A cultural movement spread across the stars, not through force, but through ideas. People no longer believed in the Empire's right to rule, and belief was the heart of power. Without participation, the Zorath systems began to fail. Inside the Zorath High Command Center, Supreme Controller Vedrak stared at endless reports of loss not of territory, but of control. Colonies were pulling out of imperial trade networks. Civilizations were switching to Earth's decentralized communication protocols. Even Zorath citizens in core worlds started questioning the Empire's purpose. Propaganda systems tried to stop the wave, but the human memes jokes and open messages kept spreading faster than the Zorath could censor. Soldiers refused orders, administrators resigned. And minor species declared independence, not with guns, but with a simple act of disengagement. They stopped recognizing Zorath authority. Vedrak ordered emergency meetings with his warlords, demanded plans for retaliation, but the warlords had no answers. How do you attack an opponent who doesn't play the same game? How do you conquer a culture that refuses to be conquered not with weapons, but with mindset? The Empire had no protocol for this. They had fleets, armies, and biocontrol technology. But none of those tools worked against a species that just didn't care about Empire logic anymore. Meanwhile, Earth continued its strange campaign. They sent no military warnings, no battle, fleets, and no threats. Instead, they flooded the galaxy with human creativity. Every day, thousands of new cultural signals left Earth's networks and spread outward stories about freedom. Jokes that exposed the absurdity of control, songs about resilience, and games that taught independence. Alien species that once lived under strict Zorath rules began to play human games, tell human jokes, and question why they had ever followed the Empire in the first place. Laughter, creativity, and curiosity replaced fear. And without fear, the Empire's structure began to collapse from within. Earth scientists monitored this cultural shift carefully. They knew the risks. If they pushed too hard, they could accidentally create a new empire of human dominance. But humanity had learned from its own history. They didn't want to replace the Zorath at the top of a galactic pyramid. They wanted to erase the pyramid entirely. So their goal was simple: build a galaxy where no one controlled everyone else. That's why Earth had shut down its participation in galactic councils. That's why they refused offers to lead. They weren't stepping back because they were afraid. They were stepping back because they wanted the galaxy to stand on its own. Ambassador Chan watched the galaxy's response with quiet focus. Reports showed that species from hundreds of star systems were creating their own independent cultures, no longer based on Empire rules. Trade shifted to open markets. Education systems began teaching decentralized thinking. Even old enemies started cooperating because without Empire fear, there was no reason to keep fighting. Humanity had unleashed a cultural domino effect, and the galaxy was changing faster than anyone expected. Back in Zorath space, Vedrak became more desperate. He activated the Empire's last resort psychological control programs devices, designed to influence thought at the neurological level, but even those systems failed. The human cultural virus had already spread too far. Minds had adapted. People had tasted freedom of thought, and no machine could reverse that. Zorath soldiers whispered human phrases in private. Commanders secretly shared human comedy clips. Entire regions of the Empire stopped following orders, not because they were under attack, but because they no longer saw the point of obedience. Earth's strategy wasn't about dominance. It was about disconnection from the system of control itself. By walking away from the Empire's game, they had shown the galaxy a new path. Power wasn't in weapons or fleets. It was in mindset, in cultural flexibility, in the ability to laugh at threats and refuse to be trapped by old systems. As the days passed, the Zorath watched helplessly while the galaxy drifted out of their grasp. Colonies once tightly controlled now held festivals celebrating independence. Alien youth groups adopted human cultural symbols, not out of worship, but out of shared values. The Empire had no answer for this. Their ships still floated in orbit, fully armed, but they were meaningless now. No one feared them. No one cared. In the shadows of Earth's defense networks, Phase 3 of the Omega program quietly activated. But this phase wasn't about destruction. It was about teaching the galaxy how to live without masters. The real victory wasn't military. It was the removal of the Empire's relevance from the universe. And that was something no empire could survive. The Zorath Collective, once the unshakable core of galactic rule, began to fracture not from war, not from invasion, but from quiet abandonment. At first, the signs were small. A supply station in Sector 19 stopped receiving reports from its outer colonies. A trade hub in the Kelvar region went dark, switching to Earth's open-source currency systems. The Empire's intelligence networks started reporting fewer transmissions from their governors. At first, Supreme Controller Vedrak thought it was sabotage. He ordered internal security teams to investigate, looking for rebels, spies, or viruses. But what they found was far worse. The systems weren't failing from attacks, they were failing because no one was using them anymore. Whole planets had simply stopped participating in the Empire's operations. They didn't rise in protest. They didn't form resistance armies. They just disconnected, following Earth's quiet example. This kind of collapse was unfamiliar. To the Zorath. They had conquered planets through fear and control for centuries. But no protocol existed for a system that just got ignored into extinction. Inside the central command chamber of the Zorath throne world, thousands of glowing data screens flickered with red alerts. Logistics grids showed massive gaps. Distribution lines were empty. Tribute schedules returned zeros. Planetary governors sent cryptic messages saying things like, "The people aren't listening anymore," or worse, "They're laughing at us." Entire education systems had flipped, teaching freedom instead of loyalty. Even within Zoroth-controlled territories, teachers shared Earth's philosophy. No ruler was worth obeying if their only power came from fear. Students began questioning the value of empire itself. Vedrak watched these reports with cold fury. His jaw clenched, his fingers tightened around the steel arms of his throne. For so long, the empire had survived because people believed it was unbeatable. But Earth hadn't tried to beat it. Earth had simply declared, "We're done," and left. And now, the rest of the galaxy was doing the same. On the planet Tarsal Prime, once a jewel of the Zorath economy, local workers stopped reporting to the Imperial factories. They repurposed the machines to build housing, medical drones, and 3D printing stations for community development. They no longer exported anything to the Empire. In the past, that would have meant military punishment. But when a Zorath enforcement cruiser arrived to enforce order, the crew found no resistance, just silence. People refused to speak to them. No meetings, no protests, no conflict. Just quiet disregard. Commander, unable to justify action. Without provocation, returned confused. He filed a report. The population has gone, culturally offline. And this story repeated itself across hundreds of systems. Farmers planted crops for local needs only. Scientists cut off Zorath, data sharing, and published discoveries openly using Earth's knowledge for all systems. With our soft set the placet soft hasn't that if we refer at a dance listless sense of well Zoratho proved broadcasts with Earth-style music, improvised, emotional, and often rebellious. A meme culture emerged in dozens of languages, all based on one shared message: we don't need rulers. Vadrak's empire relied on systems economic flow, resource control, and psychological pressure. Now all three were falling apart. The empire's tax centers stood empty. The mining colonies stopped shipments. Black markets, once small, now became the primary way species traded goods using human-designed crypto systems that the empire couldn't track. Formerly dependent species found that when they stopped asking permission, they could solve their problems without imperial help. And once they stopped needing the Zorath, they stopped fearing them. Once they stopped fearing, they started laughing. That laughter was everywhere now. Human jokes spread through alien coms. Cartoons mocked Zorath leaders with exaggerated features, cold voices, and permission slips for breathing. No force could stop it. Zorath censorship systems, once feared tools of oppression, were flooded with so many satirical versions of Earth's content that their filters overloaded. AI moderation cores crashed, trying to decipher sarcasm, irony, and wordplay. Humor had become a weapon, one that bypassed armor, ignored shields, and went straight into the minds of the people. The Zorath attempted damage control. They offered new incentives, freedom contracts, and regional autonomy packages. But it was too late. No one believed them anymore. The galactic currency they once controlled lost all value. Earth's digital networks had created free trade tokens backed by cooperation, not force. People traded because they wanted to, not because they were told to. As a result, Earth's economy bloomed in the background while the Zorath markets crumbled. The Drak's treasury ministers delivered the worst news of all. Sir, we no longer have anything the galaxy wants. Back on Earth, the unified command quietly observed. They had expected resistance. They had prepared for war. But this collapse was faster than any model had predicted. Ambassador Chan stood at the edge of a global broadcast station watching as alien ships voluntarily docked at Earth's peaceful ports, not as conquerors, but as visitors. Delegations from former Zoroth territories came not to ask for help, but to learn how Earth had resisted, how Earth had broken the chain without breaking a single law of physics. And Chan, always humble, always calm, told them the truth. We didn't fight the Empire. We just showed everyone how to live without it. The shadows of the Empire, the Zorath's own citizens, began to awaken. Middle-tier officers stopped enforcing policies. Engineers sabotaged surveillance systems, not because they were rebels, but because they no longer saw a reason to serve. The Empire wasn't feared anymore. It was mocked. And in a system built on fear, mockery is fatal. Commanders began deserting. AI fleets went offline due to data corruption, which was really code for, we don't want to anymore. The Zorath didn't collapse like a building destroyed by bombs. It withered like a tree, no longer watered by belief. On the moon world of El Naka, a symbol of Zoroth authority, a massive statue of the first Supreme Controller stood in the central plaza. One morning, locals woke up to find it dressed in a bright pink Earth-style party hat with giant cartoon eyes pasted onto its cold metal face. No one admitted doing it, but the image went viral across the galaxy in under 2 hours. The Zoroth. Response: total silence. What could they do? Declare war on a joke? Back in the core worlds, Vadrak's throne chamber grew emptier each day. Reports stopped coming in. Advisors stopped attending meetings. Even the warlords, once loyal unto death, began sending personal retreat notices. The Supreme Controller, once worshipped as a godlike figure, now sat alone, ignored by a galaxy that had simply moved on. Finally understood. It wasn't that Earth had broken the Empire. Earth had made the Empire irrelevant. As the sun rose, over Earth's peaceful countenance, new ships arrive, not warships, but trading vessels, science cruisers, and cultural exchange craft. The galaxy wasn't turning into an Earth-led empire. No. Earth had inspired a leaderless galaxy, one where creativity, cooperation, and independence took the place of fear. It was messy, chaotic, and unpredictable, but it was alive. And in that freedom, the old systems cracked, crumbled, and died quietly. While the galaxy's attention stayed focused on the visible collapse of the Zorath Empire, few realized the full depth of Earth's plan. On the surface, it seemed like humanity had won by simply walking away, laughing at the Empire, and refusing to obey. But beneath that simple action was a long, carefully designed strategy, one that had started decades before the Galactic Summit ever happened. Earth's leaders, scientists, and thinkers had quietly predicted this moment long ago. They knew the galaxy would eventually test humanity, so they had built a plan not based on weapons or conquest, but on psychological and cultural evolution. They called it the Omega Program. And now, as the Empire's systems broke apart, Phase 3 of the program was underway, not with explosions, but with ideas. Ambassador David Chan sat in Earth's Unified Command Center, reviewing new reports. From galactic networks, alien species were contacting Earth daily, not to ask for protection or leadership, but to ask for advice. How do we build a society without rulers? How do we trade without control? How do we educate without propaganda? Earth's answer was always the same: teach everyone how to think for themselves. This was the heart of the Omega Program, not just to resist Empire control, but to help the galaxy outgrow the need for empires altogether. Humanity had spent centuries learning this lesson on their own world. They had seen kings fall, dictators collapse, and systems of control crumble under the weight of human creativity. Each time people had built something new from the ruins, Earth knew that freedom came not from destruction but from outgrowing old systems. Now they had scaled that lesson to the galaxy. The Omega Program had prepared Earth for every possible scenario. Military defense, of course. Earth had advanced weapons hidden in the background, ready if needed. But they knew war wasn't the answer to empire collapse. War just creates new empires. The real weapon was cultural disarmament, teaching species to laugh at control, to refuse participation, and to build systems based on cooperation, not fear. Earth's scientists worked alongside artists, comedians, teachers, and psychologists. They created stories, games, songs, and educational programs designed to rewire minds away from authoritarian thinking. These cultural packets were sent across the galaxy for free. No conditions, no leaders required. Just open knowledge available to anyone who wanted it. As Earth disconnected from the old galactic structures, cultural content spread like wildfire. Human stories taught lessons about individuality, cooperation, and choice. Their games rewarded creativity and problem-solving, not conquest. Their education systems were open to all species, offering learning without hierarchy. Even small alien villages and distant star systems began using Earth's language models, teaching their children how to question authority, explore ideas, and innovate. It wasn't about forcing Earth's way of life onto others. It was about giving species the tools to create their own independent futures. And that was more powerful than any weapon Earth had ever invented. Meanwhile, the Zorath's remaining leaders tried desperately to stop the collapse. They sent out threats, warnings, and desperate propaganda. But no one listened anymore. The old methods of control had lost their power. Fear no longer worked. The idea of rulership itself had become a joke, a relic of a past the galaxy no longer wanted. The Empire's governors, once treated like gods, now found themselves ignored, mocked, or simply bypassed by local communities who no longer needed orders from above. Without belief in the system dissolved on its own. Back on Earth, the Unified Council met daily, not to plan wars, but to monitor the galaxy's peaceful transformation. They saw small civilizations forming their own governance systems, some based on consensus, others on rotating leadership, and some on pure local cooperation. Trade was becoming decentralized, built on trust networks rather than imperial oversight. Education spread freely, and science advanced faster than ever because no one had to ask permission to innovate. Earth shared its knowledge with no strings attached, careful not to dominate or replace the Zorath with their own form of control. They wanted diversity, not uniformity. That was the lesson humanity had learned through its own long, painful history. The future shouldn't belong to a single empire, not even to Earth. Ambassador Chan often sat quietly in his office, thinking about how strange victory felt. There were no parades, no triumphant speeches, no banners declaring conquest. Earth had simply refused to participate in the old system, and by doing so, they had shown the galaxy how to step outside the Empire's shadow. Chan understood the risk. Power has a way of creeping back in if you're not careful. Even now, some human leaders suggested Earth should take command of the new galactic order, but the Omega program had strict protocols against that. Earth wouldn't replace the Zora throne with an Earth flag. They would leave the throne empty and teach everyone why it should stay empty in the galaxy's far regions. Old enemies met in peace for the first time, trading Earth's cultural files. Like treasure, even species who once feared extinction now shared memes, jokes, and open-source tech. Conflict rates dropped. Innovation soared. People who had once lived in fear of Empire drones now built new machines for farming, medicine, and exploration. Creativity replaced conquest. Collaboration replaced coercion. And all of it started with Earth's simple refusal to kneel. Vedrak, the Supreme Controller, watched this unfold from his isolated command center. His advisors had left. His warlords had disappeared. His empire, once spanning thousands of worlds, had become a hollow shell. No one returned his messages. No one answered his calls. Sat in silence, surrounded by empty screens. His mind, once filled with strategies of domination, now struggled with one terrifying question. What do you do when no one wants to be ruled anymore? He couldn't find an answer on Earth. Children learned about the fall of the Zorath not as a tale of war, but as a lesson in cultural power. Their teachers explained how humanity had used ideas instead of weapons, laughter instead of violence. The Omega program wasn't about winning a battle. It was about teaching the galaxy how to outgrow the need for control. It was about teaching species to walk away from fear, to build lives that didn't depend on hierarchy, and to create systems where no one had to kneel to anyone else again. The galaxy wasn't perfect now. There were still conflicts, still disagreements, still challenges ahead, but the rules had changed. The old system of dominance had been replaced by something more chaotic, but also more alive. Species were building their own paths without asking for permission. They were experimenting, learning, failing, and trying again, not under the command of an empire, but through self-guided growth. In the final phase of the Omega program, Earth prepared to fade further into the background. Humanity didn't need to lead. They needed to step aside, letting the galaxy evolve on its own. Ambassador Chan smiled as he watched the new networks form, each one independent, creative, and free. The real victory wasn't in control, it was in letting go. And so, Earth returned to its own projects, quietly confident that the galaxy had learned the most powerful lesson of all. Freedom isn't given by rulers, it's taken by those who decide to live without them. On the cold, metallic surface of the Zora throne world, silence had replaced the once thunderous echoes of control. The central city, once a place of strict order and fearful obedience, now stood eerily quiet. The grand towers of administration, built with black obsidian alloys that shimmered under artificial skies, no longer projected commands. The communication centers, which had once sent out orders to thousands of star systems, now stood still, their antennae pointed toward empty space. The great holographic banners of the Zorath Collective flickered weakly, some falling into static, others simply ignored. No guards stood at the entrances of the Supreme Command Citadel. No ministers rushed through the hallways. The Empire's capital had become a hollow monument to a system no one wanted anymore. Inside the towering black pyramid at the heart of the throne world, Supreme Controller Vedrak sat alone on the Imperial command chair, his eyes sunken, his long metallic fingers resting limp on the control panel. For years, he had ruled with absolute power, making decisions that affected billions. But now, none of it mattered. No ships responded to his signals. No planetary governors followed his directives. Even his most loyal generals had gone silent. Their communication lines cut off, not by enemies, but by their own decision to disconnect. He had spent his life believing that power meant control, that fear was the most effective tool of rule. Yet now he realized that fear only works if people choose to be afraid. And somehow, the humans had taught the galaxy to stop choosing fear. Vedrak looked out from the Citadel's observation deck, staring at the city below.
Oh.
The streets were empty. His once disciplined citizens no longer marched in lines or gathered for broadcasts. Instead, scattered groups sat in circles, sharing stories, laughing, playing human games, and exchanging ideas freely. They were no longer his citizens. They were just people. They had decided in small groups at first, then in massive waves to stop living by imperial rules. They shared memes, jokes, and cultural stories from Earth that taught them to question everything. Discovered that without participation, the Empire couldn't function. No armies had come to destroy the throne world. No war fleets orbited overhead. The humans hadn't needed to send a single soldier. The idea of walking away, and the galaxy followed. Vedrak's last remaining AI advisor, Core Intelligence Unit 7, floated silently beside him. Its once brilliant blue core now flickered dimly. Supreme Controller. The AI spoke softly. The Empire's systems have reached irreversible failure. Tribute collection is at 0. Fleet loyalty is at 2% and dropping. Civilian compliance is non-functional. Vedrak didn't respond. He had heard the same reports for days, but they no longer shocked him. His empire wasn't being defeated by weapons, it was being ignored into collapse. Zorth control network, built over generations to dominate minds and systems, had no defense against simple non-participation. Without belief in the Empire's authority, the Empire was nothing in the outer districts of the throne world. Local communities had already formed new ways of living. Food production was managed collectively, not by imperial quotas. Medicine was shared freely, based on open-source human technology. Children no longer attended imperial obedience schools. Instead, they learned through interactive Earth-style learning pods where questions were encouraged and authority was challenged openly. Even the Empire's police drones had been reprogrammed not to enforce law, but to deliver supplies and help communities organize. The very tools of oppression had become tools of cooperation. There were no riots, no blood in the streets, no violent revolutions. The people had simply chosen a different way to live. Vedrak remembered when the first human signals had reached Zoroth's space music, jokes, strange Earth games, and philosophies that celebrated individual thought. At the time, he had dismissed them as noise, a distraction from the serious business of empire, but now he saw the truth. Earth had weaponized culture, turning humor and freedom into tools that dismantled systems of control without firing a shot. Vedrak whispered to himself, "They didn't destroy us. They just made us obsolete." His voice echoed in the empty chamber. No one answered. No one needed to. Across the galaxy, other Zoarth-controlled worlds followed the same pattern. Military bases became community centers. Imperial factories started building farming machines and educational tech. Warships were docked and converted into exploration vessels, their weapons removed, their controls rewired for civilian use. Former Empire soldiers returned to their home planets, not as conquerors, but as volunteers helping rebuild local societies. The Empire's collapse wasn't a sudden explosion, it was a quiet unraveling. It's like a structure abandoned by its own builders. On Earth, the Unified Command monitored the situation carefully. Ambassador David Chan, now one of the key architects of this peaceful revolution, stood before a global council. His voice was calm but serious. "We must be careful," he warned. "The galaxy is fragile right now. When empires fall, there is chaos. We must guide, not rule. Teach, but not control." The council agreed. Earth's role was not to become the new empire. Their mission was to help the galaxy learn how to live without empires at all. Open knowledge. Sharing no thrones, no crowns, no centralized power. Humanity had given the galaxy the tools to stand on its own. Back on the throne world, Vedrak finally stood from his cold command chair, his heavy steps echoing off the metal walls. He passed portraits of past rulers, great conquerors, who had believed their power would last forever. Now their faces looked down at him like shadows of a forgotten age. Had only ever opened for military parades or imperial declarations. This time, they opened for something else. Outside, thousands of former citizens stood in the plaza. They weren't angry. They weren't afraid. They were simply waiting. For what, Vedrak wasn't sure. He looked at their faces. Yes, but also members of dozens of alien species who once served the Empire under forced loyalty. Now they stood together as equals, chatting, sharing food, exchanging ideas in dozens of languages. Some of them wore Earth-made clothing. Others carried small human devices used for communication, translation, or education. Children played nearby, laughing freely, no longer shaped by imperial propaganda. Vedrak looked up at the sky. For the first time in his life, he saw no Empire banners, no military ships casting shadows over the city. Just open stars, whispered. So this is what happens when the galaxy stops believing in rulers. His AI advisor hovered silently beside him but offered no response. There was nothing left to advise. Slowly, Vedrak removed his imperial insignia, dropping the metal badge onto the ground. It clinked softly, unnoticed by the crowd. No one cheered, no one reacted, because in truth, the Empire had already ended long before he removed that badge. The galaxy had outgrown control. The throne world had collapsed not in flames, but in quiet irrelevance. And in that peaceful moment, with no orders to give and no power left to hold, Vedrak did the only thing left to do. He stepped down from the Citadel steps, walked into the crowd, and became just another person among billions anew. Longer a ruler, no longer feared, just a man learning how to live in a galaxy without empires. The galaxy had entered a new age, though no one had officially announced it. There was no ceremony, no council decree, no historical marker placed in the archives. But everyone felt the shift. Across star systems, space stations, colonies, and homeworlds, species of every kind adjusted to a life they had never imagined before, life without empires. Trade networks that once reported to imperial supervisors now operated freely, using Earth's decentralized currency systems. Planets produced food for local systems instead of shipping it to tribute centers. Scientists shared discoveries openly on human-designed knowledge platforms that required no permissions, no registrations, and no rulers to oversee them. Children grew up learning stories about cooperation, not conquest. Teachers no longer forced imperial loyalty lessons, but instead encouraged students to ask questions like, why do people follow rulers? And what happens when we choose not to? It was messy, unpredictable, and sometimes chaotic. But for the first time in history, the galaxy was free to make its own mistakes and its own discoveries. Earth's role in this new galactic age was strange and quiet. Humanity had not stepped in to control the transition. It had not declared victory or demanded gratitude. Instead, Earth kept broadcasting ideas, culture, and open-source technologies without asking for anything in return. The Omega program's final phase had begun not to dominate, but to guide quietly from the background. Earth shared education modules that taught diplomacy without hierarchy, medicine without patents, energy solutions without monopolies. They released scientific research into the public domain, refusing to lock knowledge behind barriers. Right there. Entertainment streams filled with human comedy, art, and music. Flooded alien networks not as propaganda, but as a simple invitation. Come play.
Ow.
Come learn. Come grow, no strings attached. Other species joined in, remixing human content with their own cultures, creating a living, shared galactic network of creativity that no empire could ever control. On the former Zorith worlds, life adapted rapidly. No imperial taxes, local economies boomed. Engineers once forced to design weapons now developed transportation systems, healthcare devices, and advanced farming tech. Soldiers returned to civilian life, using their skills to build communities instead of enforcing obedience. The vast imperial fleet, once a symbol of terror, now drifted in orbit, slowly being dismantled and repurposed into exploration ships, science platforms, and trade vessels. Some starships were converted into homes for wandering scholars and artists who traveled between systems, spreading new ideas. Others became mobile hospitals, serving distant colonies that had never seen proper medical care under the Empire. Supreme Controller Vedrek had disappeared from public life. But not out of shame. He had chosen to live quietly among his people. No longer wearing his imperial robes, no longer giving orders. Some whispered that he worked anonymously as a teacher on the throne world, helping young students learn about governance, not from the perspective of control, but from the lessons of failure. Vedrek had once believed that control was necessary for order, but now he understood that real order came from shared responsibility, not forced hierarchy. He spent his days discussing philosophy, ethics, and the mistakes of empire. And in that role, he found something he had never experienced before: peace in the far sectors of the galaxy. Once forgotten civilizations reconnected with the wider universe. Trade routes reopened, but this time without tribute demands. Diplomacy blossomed, not through threat, but through mutual curiosity. Species that had once fought each other under imperial manipulation now shared culture freely. Comparing ideas and solving problems together were still disputes. Of course, no galaxy is perfect, but now those disputes were settled in open forums, not on battlefields. Human-designed platforms provided translation services, legal mediation tools, conflict resolution games that helped species find common ground without violence. Earth's ambassadors became facilitators, not rulers. David Chan, once the architect of Earth's galactic strategy, continued his work, but in a different way. He traveled between systems, not to enforce Earth's will, but to offer advice when asked. He helped design learning centers where species could share governance models, testing different ways of organizing societies without falling back into empire logic. Chan often said the same thing in every meeting: "We don't have all the answers. We're just here to help you ask better questions." His humility earned respect far beyond what any show of power ever could. One of the most surprising developments in this new age was the explosion of cultural fusion. Alien species adopted parts of human culture, but mixed them with their own traditions. A reptilian civilization on the planet Krelver held weekly comedy nights where they combined Earth humor with ancient Krelver storytelling rituals. Amphibious species on the ocean world of Vosh adapted human music into underwater acoustic performances. On gas giant platforms, nomadic communities invented new sports based on human games but played in zero gravity. The galaxy became a creative playground where no one claimed ownership over ideas. Knowledge flowed freely, and innovation accelerated at a pace no empire could have ever imagined. The former Zoroth systems, once the core of oppression, now led in open technology development. Their scientists, once forced to build weapons, turned their attention to medicine, agriculture, and space exploration. One group developed gravity field generators that allowed planets with hostile environments to create stable human and alien-friendly zones for settlement. Another group designed deep space communication systems that bypassed imperial networks entirely, allowing instant cooperation between distant star systems. These inventions were shared with the entire galaxy, not for profit, but for progress. In the midst of all this change, Earth stayed careful. Humanity had learned from history that the seeds of empire can grow back if people aren't vigilant. So Earth's leaders refused to accept any central role in the new galactic network. They declined offers to become a permanent council head. They turned down suggestions to form a unified human-led defense fleet. Instead, they insisted on open councils, rotating leadership, and local decision-making. Earth focused on education, creativity, and technological support, but always with the same goal: teach others to lead themselves, not follow someone else. Children born during this new galactic age grew up without fear of imperial rule, saw warships not as threats, but as outdated relics. They learned about the collapse of the Zoroth Empire as a lesson in cultural power, not military force. History classes taught about the Silent Revolution, how humanity had shown the galaxy a new path not through battle, but through refusal to participate in control systems. The lesson was simple but powerful. You don't have to destroy an empire. If you can make it irrelevant, as the years passed, the galaxy continued to grow, experiment, and evolve. New alliances formed based on cooperation, not coercion. Species invented new art forms, shared new technologies, and explored distant regions of space together. Some mistakes were made. Some systems failed and had to be rebuilt. But there was no empire waiting to punish failure-only communities, ready to help each other try again. And somewhere, on a quiet Earth, under the stars that humans had once feared would be ruled by others, people watched the galaxy's progress with calm satisfaction. They had not become conquerors. They had become teachers of freedom, and the galaxy had listened. Years passed, and the memory of the empire faded into something distant, like an old nightmare from a time no one wanted to return to. Across the galaxy, people no longer told stories of kings, warlords, or supreme rulers. Instead, they spoke of the quiet revolution that had reshaped everything, the moment when humanity refused to kneel and simply laughed in the face of control. That laughter, soft at first, had echoed across star systems, spreading faster than any fleet, stronger than any weapon. It became a symbol, a reminder that true power doesn't come from domination, but from the decision to live without fear. The galaxy hadn't been destroyed or rebuilt by war. It had been unlocked by an idea, and that idea continued to ripple through generations. On Earth, life returned to peace. Humanity had not taken the throne of galactic leadership. They had no interest in replacing the Zoroth with their own banners. Instead, Earth remained a planet of invitation, not conquest. Their libraries were open to all species. Their digital networks flowed freely, teaching others how to build without rulers, how to create without hierarchy, and how to disagree without violence. Earth became a kind of cultural lighthouse, not guiding ships into safe harbors, but lighting up the cosmic ocean so that everyone could find their own way. New art forms blossomed. New science collaborations formed between species that once wouldn't have spoken to each other. The galaxy was still chaotic, still full of challenges, but it was alive in a way it had never been under Empire rule. The legacy of Earth's refusal was everywhere. On planets once crushed under Zoroth control, children learned about the fall of the Empire not through stories of war, but through lessons about psychology, culture, and courage. They studied how humor broke systems of fear. They learned how memes, jokes, and open knowledge replaced propaganda and obedience. Schools taught history classes called The Power of No, where students explored the moment humanity stood at the galactic summit, looked at the rulers of the galaxy, and simply walked away. That act had done more than any weapon ever could. It had shown the galaxy that refusing to play the Empire's game was more powerful than fighting it. Former Zoroth systems continued to evolve. Without tribute to pay, they built new communities based on local decision-making. Some species experimented with rotational leadership councils. Others tried consensus governance where every voice mattered equally. New ideas emerged that had never been allowed under the Empire's strict control. Technology advanced at speeds the old Empire could never match. Because knowledge was no longer hoarded for profit or power, it was shared freely across the galaxy. Medical breakthroughs, energy solutions, agricultural systems, these were the new weapons of the age. Designed not to destroy, but to improve life for everyone, the arts exploded across every world. Comedy, in particular, became a shared galactic language. Alien comedians toured from star system to star system, performing shows that mixed human humor with species-specific traditions. Satire became the strongest cultural force, a constant reminder that no system of power should ever go unquestioned again. In theaters and broadcasts, audiences laughed at old imperial symbols, poking fun at the very idea of absolute rule. This wasn't disrespect, it was a kind of freedom exercise, a cultural immune system against the return of tyranny. Laughter, once dismissed by rulers as weakness, had become the galaxy's shield. Earth's ambassadors continued their work, but they never claimed authority. They traveled as guests, not governors, helping species build educational systems, trade networks, and creative industries. David Chan, now older but still sharp, became a mentor figure across civilizations. He never preached or lectured, simply asked the same question in every meeting: what can you create when no one is telling you what to do? Questions sparked endless discussions, projects, and experiments in living. Some societies chose communal systems. Others preferred independent ventures. Some formed planetary unions. Others kept two small local governments. There was no single right answer, and that was the point. The galaxy had learned to stop searching for one-size-fits-all solutions. Instead, each world, each community, built what worked for them. Back on the former throne world of the Zorath, the towering imperial citadel had been transformed into a giant cultural center. Its black obsidian walls, once symbols of fear, now held art galleries, open forums, and creative labs. The central throne room had been turned into a theater, where performances were held daily, comedies, debates, concerts, and storytelling events. The room where Vedrek once ruled by command was now filled with laughter, dialogue, and shared creation. And sometimes, quietly and without fanfare, Vedrek himself sat in the back rows, listening, learning, and smiling at the irony of it all. In distant star systems, explorers pushed further into unknown space, not as Empire scouts, but as independent teams looking for new knowledge. They carried with them not flags of conquest, but gifts of culture, shared technologies, and friendship. Spaceports became centers of exchange, not just for goods, but for ideas. Musicians, engineers, teachers, and healers traveled together, creating a network of cooperation that stretched across the stars. And always, at the core of every encounter, was the same message: we're here to share, not to rule. Some challenges still remained. Conflicts happened. Resources were sometimes disputed. Misunderstandings between species occasionally led to tension. But now, these problems were solved through dialogue, not war. The galaxy had learned how to negotiate, how to apologize, and how to build bridges instead of walls. Earth's contribution wasn't about solving every problem. It was about teaching the galaxy how to handle problems without falling back into Empire thinking. The Omega Program, once a secret strategy developed in the shadows of Earth's defense, Council was now public knowledge. Its steps were studied openly in schools across the stars. Resist control, spread ideas, unlock culture, teach others to lead themselves, and never replace one throne with another. Humanity's refusal to rule had become the model for a galaxy that no longer wanted rulers. Freedom wasn't just a word anymore. It was a lived experience, in time. Monuments were built, not statues of leaders, but gardens of memory, where people from different species could gather to tell stories about the day the galaxy changed. They didn't celebrate conquest or power. They celebrated the simple, profound act of walking away from fear. In those gardens, children played games that taught cooperation. Elders shared wisdom without demanding obedience. Artists painted murals of the moment when Earth said no, smiled, and walked out of the galactic summit. And in the quiet moments under alien stars, when explorers camped on distant moons or communities shared meals on faraway planets, the galaxy remembered the lesson that had saved them all. You don't have to fight an empire if you can laugh at it. You walk away from it and build something better in its place. That was humanity's legacy. Not war, not rule, but the refusal to be ruled and the courage to invite everyone else to do the same.